They told me I was too old to attend my grandson's graduation. Just like that, as if my age could erase my love, my presence, my right to be there for one of the most important days of his life. I could feel the words before I even hung up the phone. Mom, maybe it's best if you stay home. It's a big crowd and, well, you're too old to travel. I'll admit it, my chest tightened, my heart sank, and for a fleeting moment I wondered if they were right. But then, anger mixed with hurt and determination took over. How dare they decide who belongs in their lives? How dare they try to silence me as if my love for my family didn't matter? I started packing my bag, telling myself this wasn't just about a ceremony. It was about showing them that age doesn't define worth, that respect isn't optional, and that a mother's voice, when ignored for too long, has a way of making itself heard. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold. I didn't know if they would apologize or if they would continue to look down on me. What I did know is that I was going. And when I arrived, what happened next would shock them, and anyone who ever thought they could push me aside. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the suitcase I hadn't opened yet. My hands hovered over the zipper, hesitant, as if touching it might make this moment real. I had flown across the country before, yes, but never with a heart this heavy or this determined. Today wasn't just about a graduation. It was about being seen, being respected, being part of my grandson's life when my family had tried so hard to erase me from it. I began packing, carefully folding each piece of clothing, weighing not only the physical weight, but the emotional burden, a sweater that reminded me of my late husband. Yes, I would bring it, for comfort. A scarf he had once kissed me with before leaving for work. Yes, that too. These weren't just items. They were armor. I needed to feel strong, dignified, untouchable, even when my family tried to make me feel invisible. As I folded my favorite blouse, my mind wandered to the words my son had spoken over the phone. Mom, it's really better if you stay home. It's a big crowd. You're too old to travel. The sting of those words cut deeper than I expected. Too old. As if the decades I had devoted to raising him, the love I had poured into our family, suddenly didn't matter. Too old to attend a ceremony that marked one of the most important milestones in my grandson's life. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of hurt, anger, and disbelief. I paused, hand resting on the suitcase, breathing slowly to steady the fluttering in my stomach. My fear was real. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of walking into a room where my presence might be unwelcome. But alongside it, a quiet spark of excitement began to grow. There's something electric about standing up for yourself, about breaking the expectations others try to impose on you. I was terrified, yes, but I was also alive in a way I hadn't been in years. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I ran through my plan. I would arrive quietly, not announcing myself until I was ready. I would watch, listen, assess the room, the reactions, the subtle glances, the whispers. I knew them. I knew my son, my daughter-in-law, my family, and I knew how easily they could underestimate me. That underestimation would be my advantage. Every dismissive glance, every sigh, every moment they tried to brush me aside only fueled the determination inside me. My thoughts flicked back to the past, to times when my family had dismissed me before. The holiday dinners, where my opinions were ignored. The birthday parties, where my seat at the table felt invisible. The phone calls left unanswered when I had tried to reach out. I remembered my suggestions waved away with a casual, "Mom, we'll handle it," and the times my accomplishments were met with silence instead of pride. Every slight, every subtle dismissal, every moment I had been overlooked had built up inside me like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, imagining the journey ahead. The airport, the flight, the long hours of anticipation, the moment I would step into the venue. Every detail ran through my mind. I rehearsed conversations I might have to have, rehearsed the calm firmness I would need in my voice. I would not shout, I would not cry, I would not beg. I would simply be there. That presence alone would speak volumes. Packing my toiletries, I lingered over the small items that would make me feel human, prepared, and grounded. My favorite perfume, a small mirror to check my posture, my glasses perched delicately in their case. Each object was a piece of my confidence. I would need that, because no matter how carefully I packed, no matter how meticulously I prepared, nothing could fully prepare me for the tension of walking into a room where I wasn't expected. Then came the mental checklist: plane ticket, Idaho, travel bag, emergency snacks, and alongside it, the emotional checklist: courage, dignity, calm, patience, awareness. I went over it again and again, whispering to myself, I am going, I am worthy, I am here for my grandson, and I will not be erased. I sat on the edge of the bed again, suitcase at my feet, and let a slow smile creep onto my face. Fear still lingered like a shadow, but excitement pulsed stronger. This was my moment, my choice, my declaration. I would not hide in the background while my family treated me like I was invisible. I would arrive. I would stand tall. And whatever happened next, I would face it on my terms. By the time I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder, the room felt different. The air felt charged. My heart raced not just with nerves, but with anticipation of the confrontation to come. I was ready to be seen, ready to claim my place, ready to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. And as I stepped toward the door, I paused, just for a moment, to whisper to myself one final affirmation. They might have told me I was too old. But I am exactly where I belong. The morning of my flight arrived, and with it came a flood of nerves I hadn't fully felt the night before. I double-checked my suitcase, the papers in my purse, my boarding pass, and my ticket. Every small item seemed to carry the weight of this journey, not just a trip across the country, but a crossing of invisible boundaries my family had set up, a challenge to the idea that I could be silenced or ignored. I hailed the cab to the airport, gripping my bag with more force than necessary. The city blurred past the window, but I noticed every little thing: the street vendors setting up, the early commuters hurrying to work, a child laughing with their mother, and it all felt distant, as if I was moving through a different world, a world where I didn't just exist quietly in the background. Security was the first real obstacle. The line snaked around the terminal, travelers buzzing with impatience. I felt a jolt of anxiety when the metal detector beeped at me. A harmless false alarm, but my heart raced like it was the prelude to some grand ordeal. Even a small, everyday disruption felt amplified today. I whispered to myself, stay calm, one step at a time. You're doing this for your grandson. Settling into my seat on the plane, I tried to focus on breathing. My mind wandered between fear and anticipation. What would they say when they saw me? Would my son avert his eyes, embarrassed or angry? Would my daughter-in-law treat me with quiet disdain, or would she try to argue, to push me aside? The doubts crowded in, relentless, but beneath them a deeper, steadier current of determination flowed. Determination that no comment, no slight, no family expectation could erase. The flight attendants moved methodically up and down the aisle, offering water, smiling politely, oblivious to the storm inside my head. I sipped my tea, feeling it warm me in a way nothing else could. Every minute in that cabin felt like a drumbeat, counting down to the confrontation that awaited me at my destination. I watched the clouds outside the window, drifting by like silent witnesses, each one carrying me closer to a room where I would either be dismissed or finally recognized. Small obstacles continued to punctuate the journey. Turbulence that made my stomach lurch, a delay on the tarmac that stretched minutes into what felt like hours. Each minor disruption reminded me that life rarely follows a smooth path, that even a journey to claim your place is not without its bumps. And yet, each challenge also strengthened my resolve. I was learning in small ways to navigate not just the physical flight, but the emotional one. My thoughts returned to my grandson. His graduation wasn't just a ceremony. It was a marker of his growth, his achievements, and the years I had watched him grow from afar. To miss it would be a kind of surrender I couldn't accept. I imagined seeing him in his cap and gown, proud and unaware of the inner storm his grandmother had braved just to be there. I imagined the moment he looked my way, wondering why I was standing in the crowd, and the realization hitting him that I had always been there, no matter what his parents said. The closer we got to our destination, the more my heart raced. I found myself rehearsing the entrance in my mind. I imagined walking in, calm, collected, carrying only myself and my dignity. I imagined the hush that might fall over the room, the whispers, the sidelong glances. I imagined my son frozen, realizing that his attempt to sideline me had failed. The anticipation coiled tightly in my chest, both thrilling and terrifying. Questions tumbled through my mind. Would they even let me in? Would my presence be welcomed or met with hostility? What if I faltered? If my fear got the better of me? Each doubt was a shadow I had to confront as the plane descended, the ground approaching faster than I was ready to accept. And yet, with every passing moment, my excitement swelled. I was on my way. I was doing what they said I couldn't. And that knowledge, the quiet rebellion of being present, despite their objections, gave me a strange, exhilarating power. By the time the plane touched down, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline, a cocktail of emotions that left me trembling slightly as I gathered my belongings. I moved through the terminal, feeling eyes on me, some imagined, some real, as if everyone could sense the tension building inside me. Every step toward the exit was a step toward the confrontation I had envisioned countless times, a confrontation I both dreaded and craved. I called the cab, sat in the back seat, and looked out at the cityscape rushing by. The airport faded behind me, but the story I was about to step into loomed larger than ever. I rehearsed my inner mantra one more time. I am worthy. I belong. I will not be ignored. With each repetition, my fear softened, replaced by anticipation. The anticipation of being seen, of standing tall, of finally confronting the subtle dismissals and hidden resentments that had followed me for years. And as the car approached the neighborhood where my family lived, I realized that every anxious thought, every small obstacle on the flight, every doubt I had nursed along the way had led me to this moment. I wasn't just arriving for a graduation. I was arriving to reclaim my voice, my dignity, my place in a family that had tried to sideline me. The confrontation awaited, tense, inevitable, and certain to leave its mark. I took a deep breath, feeling the knot of anticipation tighten and then loosen, and whispered to myself, soon they'll see. They'll see that age doesn't define me, that silence is my choice, and that my presence cannot be ignored. I stepped out of the cab and felt the crisp air hit my face. It was colder than I expected, and yet it didn't matter. My suitcase clicked against the pavement as I walked toward the venue, each step echoing in my ears. The building loomed ahead, grand and imposing, filled with the laughter, chatter, and excitement of families celebrating their children's milestones. And in the midst of all that joy, my presence was supposed to be irrelevant. That was what they had tried to tell me. Too old to attend, they had said, but here I was. The entrance felt like a threshold into another world, a place where my role in this family was about to be tested. I paused at the doorway, adjusting my coat, taking a steadying breath, and reminded myself that I was not there to fight. I was there to exist, fully, unapologetically, in the space that was always mine by right. As I stepped inside, I noticed the subtle glances, a hush that fell over a small cluster of people, the quick exchange of worried looks, the slight stiffening of bodies as I passed. I felt their attention before I even acknowledged it, and it bolstered me. I scanned the room, trying to find my son, and then I saw him. My heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't just excitement. It was the familiar tension of expectation and fear. His eyes darted to the floor the instant they landed on me. He didn't meet my gaze. He wouldn't. The avoidance was sharp, deliberate, almost painful to witness. I could feel every ounce of judgment, every flicker of discomfort radiating from him. My stomach knotted, but I squared my shoulders and reminded myself this was not about his comfort. This was about my right to be here. Next, my gaze landed on my daughter-in-law. Her head lowered instinctively, as if the weight of my presence was more than she could bear. There was no greeting, no hint of warmth, just that quiet, almost invisible gesture of submission, shame, or perhaps guilt. I wasn't certain which. It didn't matter. The effect was the same. The room had changed, subtly but unmistakably, and all eyes, even if they pretended otherwise, had registered that I had arrived. I walked slowly, deliberately, making each step count. The clatter of my heels against the floor sounded louder in my own ears than it did to anyone else, but I relished the rhythm, the assertion. Every inch I covered through that room was a declaration. I would not be ignored. I would not be dismissed. The awkward silence stretched, a taut cord across the space, binding us all in unspoken tension. People turned their heads slightly, whispers fluttered like wings in the background, and I could feel the unspoken words hanging thick in the air. Why is she here? And there it was, the first full moment of confrontation without words. I didn't have to speak. My presence alone made the statement. I could sense the panic ripple through my family. My son's shoulders stiffened. A hand brushed nervously against his lapel. My daughter-in-law fidgeted with a napkin, glancing anywhere but at me. The room held its breath, or perhaps it was only I who felt the weight of it, the electricity of a moment suspended in expectation. I paused near the seats where my grandson would be seated. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to observe him, unaware of the storm his grandmother had weathered to be here. The pride I felt for him was nearly overwhelming, almost tangled with the frustration of the obstacles that had been placed in my way. And yet, that mixture of love and indignation only fueled me further. I straightened, lifted my chin, and allowed a calm smile to settle on my face. Not arrogance, not defiance, just quiet strength, dignity, and the presence of someone who knows their worth. The whispers grew a fraction louder, the uneasy glances more frequent. A few distant relatives exchanged looks, as if silently acknowledging what I had done. That my arrival had shifted the room's dynamics. The awkwardness became almost palpable, and I felt a wave of satisfaction surge through me. It wasn't the confrontation itself that thrilled me. It was the fact that they had underestimated me for so long, and here I was, unbowed, unyielding, visible. I continued to move forward slowly, taking care to make eye contact only where I chose. Some faces flinched, others averted their gaze. The room seemed to contract and expand around me, tension radiating like heat from a flame. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was also the exact space I wanted to occupy. Every slight, Every dismissive word from the past years had led to this quiet yet potent assertion: I was here and I belonged. When I finally reached the row where I would sit, I paused once more, letting the silence linger. I could feel my son's eyes on me, still avoiding, still weighed with uncertainty. My daughter-in-law's head remained lowered, the tension coiling in her posture like a spring ready to snap. And in that pause, in that careful, deliberate stillness, I realized something remarkable. I had already won a part of this battle. Not with words, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with presence alone. And as I finally lowered myself into my seat, suitcase at my side, I allowed myself a deep, slow breath. The room remained tense, the awkward silence stretching just a little longer, and yet I felt a quiet thrill. The first reactions had played out exactly as I had imagined. Stunned, silent, uncertain. I had arrived, and the ripple of my presence had been felt by all. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle movement spoke volumes. I knew the confrontation hadn't yet happened. That was still to come. But this initial shock, this pause of recognition, was mine to savor. I leaned back slightly, letting the anticipation build inside me. The room had noticed me. They had felt me. And when the moment arrived to speak, to reveal the truth I had carried with me all these years, I would be ready. For now, I sat quietly, absorbing the tension, letting it wash over me like a tide, feeling the power of a presence that could no longer be ignored. And as I watched my family scramble to adjust to my arrival, I whispered softly to myself, they thought I would stay home. They thought they could erase me. But I am here. And this is only the beginning. I had sat quietly for what felt like an eternity, my hands resting lightly on the edge of my purse, eyes fixed on my grandson as he smiled proudly in his cap and gown. But beneath the calm exterior, my mind was rehearsing the words I had been carrying for years, the truths my family had avoided, brushed aside, or tried to hide behind polite smiles and dismissive gestures. Today, I would speak them. Today, I would reclaim my voice. The moment came when the program paused for a brief intermission. Guests murmured softly, moving around the hall with polite curiosity, but I remained seated, drawing a slow, steadying breath. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive sense, but I was resolute. Calmly, deliberately, I rose, feeling the eyes of my family prickling at the back of my head. My son looked up, startled, his brows knitting together, but still he didn't meet my gaze. My daughter-in-law's head lifted slightly, her lips pressed tight, a faint flush spreading across her cheeks. I began speaking, my voice steady, carrying across the room in a way that surprised even me. I've been told I'm too old to attend my grandson's graduation, I said, letting each word land deliberately. Too old to travel, too old to understand, too old to matter. But I am here, I am present, and I am proud. Proud of my grandson, proud of the family I've built, and proud of the years I've spent loving and guiding all of you. The room fell silent, not a murmur, not a cough, just the weight of attention pressing in from every direction. I continued, explaining why this moment mattered, not just for me, but for all of us. You may think age limits me, that experience can be ignored, or that my voice can be silenced, but life doesn't work that way. Respect isn't given because it's convenient. It's earned through recognition, through understanding, and through presence. And I've been here, quietly watching, supporting, and loving, even when it wasn't acknowledged. I could see it slowly registering. My son's shoulders slumped slightly, a crack appearing in the wall he had built around himself. My daughter-in-law's eyes darted to mine, not with anger now, but with a dawning realization that I was not a woman to be brushed aside lightly. The underestimation, the assumptions, the dismissals, they had misjudged me, All those years they had thought I was too old, too weak, too inconsequential. They were wrong. I continued calmly, outlining specific moments of disregard, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I remember the holiday dinners where suggestions were ignored. I remember the birthdays where my seat at the table felt invisible. I remember the times I tried to reach out, only to be met with silence. Each of those moments was a message that I didn't matter, and yet here I am, still standing, still present, still part of this family, still proud. The tension was tangible, a living thing in the room, bending and stretching with every word. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure where to look, uncertain how to react. Some glanced at one another, perhaps realizing how often they had underestimated me. Some stared at me, startled at the calm certainty in my voice. My grandson looked at me with curiosity, sensing the gravity in my tone, though not fully understanding the history behind it. I spoke next about my own feelings, fear, hurt, and determination, framing them not as accusations, but as explanations. I was hurt. Yes, I said. Hurt when I was dismissed, ignored, told I didn't belong. But that hurt has taught me strength. It has taught me patience, and it has taught me the importance of showing up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I'm not welcomed as easily as I wish I were. The realization seemed to dawn slowly on my family. My son's jaw tightened, his eyes meeting mine briefly before dropping again. My daughter-in-law's posture straightened, almost defensively, as if she were bracing herself against the power of my words. Every subtle shift in body language confirmed what I had known all along. They had underestimated me. They thought my age, my quiet nature, my patience, and my long absence from confrontations meant I could be overlooked. But the calmness in my tone, the deliberate truth I spoke, shattered that illusion. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic flair. I simply spoke the truth, clearly and firmly, and that clarity carried more weight than anger ever could. It settled over the room like a tide, softening some hearts, startling others, and leaving everyone present with a sense that something had shifted irreversibly. I concluded with the most important point, that respect is not optional, and presence is a powerful statement. I came here today not to fight, not to argue, but to remind you all, and not myself, that I am part of this family. I am part of this moment, and my love, my guidance, and my presence are not negotiable. For a few seconds, the room was suspended in silence. Then came the first subtle acknowledgement. My son's hand twitched, as though he wanted to reach out but couldn't quite find the words. My daughter-in-law's gaze softened slightly, the tension in her posture easing. The shift was almost imperceptible, but it was there. They were beginning to see me, not as a figure to be sidelined, but as a person who had quietly endured, persistently loved, and finally claimed her place. I took my seat again, calm, composed, but triumphant in my own way. The confrontation had begun not with conflict, but with truth. And truth, I had learned long ago, has a power all its own, subtle, steady, undeniable. As I sat, I allowed a small, quiet smile to form. They had underestimated me. They had expected me to stay silent, to step aside, to accept their judgment without challenge. But I had spoken. I had asserted myself. And in that act alone, I had already won a measure of respect they could not take back. The rest of the ceremony continued around us, but the room felt different now. Every glance, every whispered word, every sidelong glance carried the memory of my calm confrontation. I had planted a seed, a quiet but powerful reminder that I could no longer be dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. And as my grandson smiled proudly, Oblivious to the storm I had navigated to be here, I felt a sense of quiet victory, one that was entirely mine. After speaking my truth, I returned to my seat, feeling the weight of the room on my shoulders. The initial shock had passed, but the tension hadn't. My son avoided my eyes, his jaw clenched tightly as if holding back words he couldn't yet form. My daughter-in-law sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly it was clear she was trying to steady herself against the storm I had quietly unleashed. Every glance from the surrounding relatives seemed to flicker between curiosity and discomfort. The subtle shift in energy reminded me that what I had started, my calm declaration, was far from over. I leaned back slightly, straightening my spine and lifting my chin. In that posture, I was not defiant in anger, but deliberate in presence. I reminded myself that dignity was my greatest ally. Anger might have been satisfying, but it could also undermine the authority of my voice. Calmness, clarity, and confidence. These were my tools, far more potent than any raised voice or accusatory tone. I had learned long ago that true power is quiet, persistent, and unshakable. As I observed the reactions around me, I began to employ subtle, clever ways to assert myself without confrontation. I allowed my gaze to sweep the room slowly, making eye contact only when necessary. Each time I looked at someone, I did so with measured calm, letting them feel the presence of someone who had been overlooked for years but refused to be ignored any longer. My son flinched slightly when my eyes met his, a tiny acknowledgement that the dynamic had changed. My daughter-in-law adjusted in her seat, a silent sign of her awareness that I was no longer a passive participant in their family hierarchy. I used small gestures to reinforce my quiet authority, a deliberate nod here, a calm, knowing smile there. When someone attempted to engage me in trivial conversation or redirect attention, I listened politely, acknowledged their words, then returned my focus to my grandson and the ceremony. Each measured action conveyed that I was fully present, unshaken, and in control of my emotions. I was asserting my boundaries without confrontation, letting my dignity speak louder than words ever could. The suspense in the room built naturally as I maintained this balance. My calmness, paradoxically, was unsettling. People around me were unsure how to respond, caught between lingering irritation, respect, and a dawning realization that I had orchestrated my presence in a way they hadn't anticipated. They were watching me closely, aware now that the grandmother they had underestimated was quietly steering the emotional currents of the room. Throughout the ceremony, I focused on my inner mantra: patience, presence, strength. I repeated it silently with each passing moment, grounding myself. I knew the payoff. The moment when the full impact of my presence and quiet authority would be undeniable was approaching. I didn't rush it. I let it build. Anticipation, after all, is a powerful tool when wielded correctly. By staying calm, I was not only maintaining my dignity, but also heightening the effect of what was to come. I recalled moments from past family gatherings, times when my voice had been brushed aside, when my concerns had been minimized, when my suggestions had been ignored. Instead of reacting with anger back then, I had internalized the lessons those dismissals had taught me: patience, observation, timing, and subtle assertion. Those lessons guided me now, allowing me to turn every slight into an opportunity to strengthen my position. Each avoidance, each whispered comment, each side glance from my family only reinforced my determination to remain composed. Even as whispers continued around me, I refused to be drawn into petty arguments or defensive gestures. Instead, I maintained a calm smile and steady posture, letting the awkward energy of the room emphasize my poise. My quiet presence began to speak volumes. It was as if I were telling them without words, I am unshaken, I am here. You misjudged me. I also made mental notes of each subtle reaction, cataloging them for my own reflection. My son's twitching fingers, the quick downward glance of my daughter-in-law, the raised eyebrows of distant relatives, each was a piece of the larger puzzle. These reactions confirmed that the tension was building. The room had acknowledged my voice, my presence, and my dignity, but the full emotional release, the payoff, had not yet occurred. As the ceremony continued, I observed the ripple effect of my composure. Conversations around me slowed, and the attention subtly shifted toward me, even without my seeking it. My calmness was contagious, drawing attention, commanding respect, and heightening the anticipation. I could feel the suspense building in my chest, a tight coil that mirrored the reactions of those around me. The moment when everything would come to a head, when my family would truly recognize the weight of my presence, was approaching, and I welcomed it. I allowed myself small internal celebrations for maintaining this composure. No raised voice, no sharp retort, just presence and quiet authority. Each successful pause, each deliberate gesture, each unflinching moment reinforced the message I had been delivering all along. I would not be silenced. My dignity was intact. My power, subtle but undeniable, was growing with every passing second. By the time my grandson's name was called for his award, I had fully anchored myself in this calm, poised state. I knew that the payoff moment, the realization, the awe, the acknowledgement from my family was imminent. All I had to do was stay the course, continue asserting my presence with grace, and let the natural course of events unfold. The tension was not only palpable, but perfectly orchestrated. My family had underestimated me, misjudged me, and dismissed me for far too long. And now, in this carefully maintained calm, the scales were beginning to tip. I took another deep breath, letting the energy of the moment settle around me. My heart raced just slightly, not with fear, but with the thrill of anticipation. I had built this suspense deliberately, with patience and foresight. Every gesture, every glance, every word spoken earlier had contributed to the atmosphere of tension. I was ready for the moment when the impact of my presence, my calm authority, and my dignity would finally land fully, leaving them no choice but to see me for who I truly was. And as I watched my grandson accept his recognition, my gaze shifted subtly to my son and daughter-in-law. Their eyes met mine, hesitant, unsure, beginning to acknowledge the truth I had long carried silently. They had underestimated me. They had believed that age, distance, and my quiet demeanor could diminish my influence. But now they were confronted with the reality of a mother who had maintained her composure, asserted herself cleverly, and prepared for this moment with precision. The moment arrived like a slow sunrise, gradual but undeniable, sweeping over the room and bathing every face in the weight of realization. I had stayed calm, poised, deliberate, allowing my presence and quiet authority to build tension over the hours. And now, at last, it was paying off. The subtle power I had cultivated, the calm composure, the thoughtful words, the deliberate gestures, was finally landing in the hearts and minds of my family. It began with my son. I saw the shift first in him. His eyes widened ever so slightly, the tension in his jaw relaxing just a fraction. He avoided meeting my gaze earlier, as if acknowledging me would be admitting some uncomfortable truth, but now I could see the recognition forming. It wasn't just fear or surprise. It was understanding, the dawning realization that his mother, the woman he had underestimated, had quietly orchestrated a presence that commanded respect without raising a hand in anger. My daughter-in-law's reaction was slower, but no less significant. She lifted her head fully for the first time since my arrival, eyes meeting mine, a mixture of astonishment and grudging respect flickering across her features. It was as if a veil had lifted, revealing the truth she had tried to ignore. I was not a passive figure, not someone who could be dismissed lightly, and not someone who would shrink in the face of subtle hostility or dismissive comments. My calmness had spoken louder than any argument could, and it was finally being acknowledged. Around the room, I noticed the subtle but powerful shifts. Relatives whispered quietly to each other, eyes darting between my son and me, between my daughter-in-law and me. The silence was thick, almost tangible, a pause heavy with the acknowledgement that they had underestimated me for far too long. No one spoke. Yet every unspoken word reverberated through the space. We didn't expect this. We didn't see this coming. And in that silence, in that collective pause of astonishment, the truth of my presence, my dignity, my perseverance, and my strength was recognized. I allowed myself a slow, deliberate smile, not smug, not gloating, simply a smile born of quiet triumph. I didn't need to shout or demand attention. The effect had been achieved. Their reactions were proof enough that respect, once earned, could not be taken away. My calm authority, patience, and strategic presence had created a moment so potent that words could not diminish it. As my grandson walked across the stage, proud in his cap and gown, I felt a surge of pride mixed with vindication. The applause from the crowd was loud and joyous, but my attention was on the subtle acknowledgement from my family. My son shifted in his seat, a small nod escaping his lips, as though he was silently conceding that I had been right all along. My daughter-in-law's posture softened, the tension in her shoulders easing, and I sensed her recognition of the quiet power I had wielded. The awkward silence that had hung over the room earlier had transformed into a new kind of silence, one of respect. Not forced, not reluctant, but genuine acknowledgement that I was present, capable, and unyielding in a way they had not anticipated. I had built the suspense carefully, holding my composure, letting them underestimate me, and now, at the payoff, the realization landed with a profound clarity that left them momentarily speechless. I could see it in the micro-expressions, a raised eyebrow here, a quick inhale there, lips pressing together, slight shifts in body posture. My family was processing a hard truth, that the grandmother they thought too old, too quiet, too distant, was in fact formidable in her own right. My voice, my presence, my deliberate actions had created a moment that would be remembered far beyond the ceremony itself. The room felt different now, charged with a new energy. No longer was I invisible or overlooked. Every glance in my direction carried acknowledgement. Every subtle gesture toward me hinted at the respect that had been earned. I had proven that dignity, patience, and calm assertion could accomplish far more than anger or confrontation ever could. My family's stunned reactions, the weighty silence, and the dawning recognition of my strength were the ultimate payoff for the emotional journey I had undertaken. I leaned back slightly in my seat, feeling the quiet thrill of victory pulse through me. I didn't need to gloat. There was no need for confrontation or argument. The moment itself, unfolding naturally, was enough. The respect I had earned was visible in the tension that had shifted, in the silence that had become acknowledgement, and in the subtle, unspoken admissions of my family. And as my grandson accepted his certificate, looking out at the crowd with pride and excitement, I allowed myself a private moment of satisfaction. I had come for him, yes, to witness his achievement, to celebrate his milestone. But in doing so, I had also claimed my own victory, the victory of presence, of truth spoken with calm authority, and of dignity maintained in the face of years of underestimation. It was a moment that could not be replicated, a lesson delivered not in anger, but in steadfast, deliberate action. And I knew that from this point forward, the perception of me within this family had shifted irreversibly. They had been stunned, silenced, and forced to confront the truth I was to be seen, heard, and respected, no longer quietly overlooked. I leaned back in my seat, allowing the moment to wash over me. The room was charged, but not with chaos or conflict. It was quiet, tense, and attentive. My family, who had expected a compliant grandmother, a silent observer, a figure who could be pushed aside without consequence, was now stunned into silence. Every subtle movement, every shift in posture, every stolen glance toward me spoke volumes. I didn't need words. The silence itself was affirmation, acknowledgement, and a measure of respect I had earned without raising my voice. I watched my son, his usual assertiveness replaced with uncertainty. His eyes avoided mine for the first few minutes after the confrontation, but now I could see the change, a hesitation, a flicker of understanding, and finally, a recognition that I had stood my ground calmly, firmly, and with dignity. There was no anger in me, only resolve, and that calm resolve was something they couldn't ignore. It settled over the room like a quiet wave, reshaping the way they perceived me in subtle but irreversible ways. My daughter-in-law's reaction was equally telling. Her head remained slightly lowered, lips pressed tight in a thoughtful line, but the tension in her shoulders had eased. She had witnessed, perhaps reluctantly, the power of quiet assertion. No theatrics, no dramatics, simply a woman standing tall in her truth, unshaken by dismissive behavior or the weight of familial expectation. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and in that small exchange, I felt a current of acknowledgement pass between us. The rest of the room shifted as well. Relatives who had glanced casually in my direction now studied me with a mix of astonishment and respect. The whispered conversations had died down, replaced by subtle nods, quiet recognition, and the undeniable understanding that I had transformed the dynamics of this gathering. The energy in the room had changed. No longer was I someone to be overlooked or underestimated. I had demonstrated with poise and patience that my presence carried weight and deserved attention. I allowed myself a deep breath, savoring the moment. Pride surged through me, not in a boastful way, but as a quiet internal acknowledgement of my own strength. I had faced years of subtle disregard, dismissals, and assumptions that my age or quiet demeanor made me inconsequential. And now, in the stillness of this room, I felt the sweet satisfaction of validation. My voice, my presence, and my patience had created a moment that could not be erased. There was an almost surreal quality to watching their reactions. The air seemed thicker, charged with the realization that I had asserted myself without anger or drama. Each person processed the quiet power I had wielded in their own way. A subtle bow of acknowledgement here, a small nod there, and I meeting mine briefly before darting away again. These micro-reactions carried the weight of years of underestimation, now crumbling under the undeniable reality of my dignity. I reflected internally on the journey that had brought me here. From packing my bags, enduring anxious travel, and navigating the initial awkwardness of my arrival, to the deliberate calm in my confrontation and the clever assertion of my boundaries, every step had led to this moment of quiet triumph. I had anticipated this payoff, yet even as it unfolded, the emotional impact was profound. It was validation, yes, but also a powerful affirmation of my own self-respect and moral authority. My grandson, oblivious to the subtle undercurrents, beamed proudly in his seat, unaware of the emotional storm his grandmother had weathered to be present. Yet, in watching him, I felt an even deeper sense of satisfaction. I had been here for him, not just physically, but as a witness to his achievements, while simultaneously asserting my rightful place in this family. The combination of pride for him and pride in myself intertwined, creating a moment of emotional resonance I would carry long after the ceremony ended. I observed my son again, noting the hesitation in his posture, the subtle lowering of his gaze, and the quiet acknowledgement that he had underestimated me. There was no dramatic confrontation, no angry exchanges, just the slow, dawning realization that I was neither a figure to be silenced nor a presence to be dismissed lightly. The respect I had earned was clear, embedded in the subtle shifts of body language, the almost imperceptible gestures, and the enveloping silence that spoke louder than words ever could. And then I felt it fully. The satisfaction of having stood firm, the validation of my actions, and the profound dignity that comes from being true to oneself. I had not allowed fear, doubt, or their past behavior to diminish me. I had not shouted, argued, or demanded recognition. Instead, I had relied on patience, presence, and quiet authority, creating a moment where my family could not help but acknowledge my worth. The room remained hushed, not from tension or discomfort now, but from the weight of recognition. Each family member was processing, internally recalibrating their assumptions and adjusting their perception of me. I sat back, letting the silence envelop me, feeling the resonance of a truth long held, finally acknowledged. Pride coursed quietly through me, pride in my composure, pride in my judgment, and pride in my ability to navigate a delicate balance between strength and calm. I allowed myself a final internal reflection. Every slight, every dismissal, every underestimated moment from the past had built toward this day. And now, in the stillness and silence of the room, I felt a deep sense of completion. I had faced the challenge, maintained my dignity, and earned the respect that had long been denied. The emotional impact was profound. Satisfaction, validation, and an unshakable sense of pride interwoven into every breath I took. And as the ceremony continued, the applause ringing out for my grandson, I remained quietly triumphant. I had claimed my space, spoken my truth, and witnessed my family's recognition without a single raised voice. Their silence was my acknowledgement, their stunned composure my reward, and my dignity, preserved, unwavering, the ultimate victory. I stood, slowly gathering my things, letting the subtle hum of the graduation ceremony surround me one last time. My suitcase clicked against the floor as I walked, deliberate, unhurried, letting each step carry the weight of years I had endured and the quiet triumph I had earned. My son's eyes avoided mine. My daughter-in-law's head remained lowered, and yet I didn't need them to look. I didn't need acknowledgement anymore. The acknowledgement had already been given in the stunned silence and subtle shifts I had observed. The air outside the venue felt crisp and liberating. I drew in a deep breath, letting the wind brush against my face, carrying away the tension, the old doubts, and the lingering frustration. I thought about everything I had learned in patience, calm authority, the quiet power of presence. Every step I had taken, every deliberate word I had spoken had led to this moment, leaving with dignity intact, having asserted myself without anger, and having reminded everyone in the room that I was here, I mattered, and I deserved respect. As I walked to the cab, I reflected on the lesson I had quietly reinforced for my family. That respect is earned not through compliance or silence, but through consistent strength, integrity, and the courage to show up fully, even when you feel underestimated. Pride swelled quietly in my chest, a steady warmth that no words could diminish. And as the cab door closed behind me, I whispered, almost to myself, they wanted me quiet. But at dessert, I served more than sweetness. I served respect. With that, I smiled, knowing I had not only celebrated my grandson's achievement, but had also quietly claimed my own. The story wasn't about confrontation. It was about dignity, presence, and the enduring power of quietly asserting your truth.